Welcome back to my prostate cancer recovery diary. I'm thinking about changing the title to this YouTube channel. Recovery is probably not an apt description anymore. That is, my cancer seems on the march. It's marching very slowly. I call it my slow dance with mortality. But my prostate-specific antigen score, PSA score, the antigen is a protein molecule that's in prostate cells, has been increasing over the last about year. I'll give you details down the road. Now, the prostate-specific antigen is, again, a protein molecule in prostate, and as that score rises, it can be an indication of prostate cancer. Mine indeed was an indication of prostate cancer, and in July 2020, my surgeon in a 6-arm robot ripped from my nether regions my prostate and 6 lymph nodes. The lymph nodes were not cancerous. Alas, the outside edge of the prostate was cancerous, though I didn't learn this for about a year. That is, the very outside edge of my prostate contained cancer cells, meaning almost certainly there are still cancer cells in my body. And it was where the location of the prostate used to be, known as the prostate bed. Anyway, my prostate bed wasn't a very good resting point, so my doc sent me to a radiation oncologist who nuked the heck out of my nether regions for 8 weeks daily, weekends off, Monday through Friday, 8 weeks. And my PSA stayed down low until starting about a year ago. It's been increasing modestly. I'm calling this my slow dance with mortality. It is still on the ultra-sensitive level, but the recent studies indicate the ultra-sensitive level is meaningful, especially when you have a rising trajectory. So what am I going to do about this? Well, I've been feeling more and more fatigued over time, a harder time recovering from bicycle rides. I can still ride 100 miles, but a harder time recovering, generally feeling body fatigue all the time. I think part of that is cancer. Part of that is I've been suffering a series of maladies, which I'll summarize shortly. So what am I going to do? I am going to take on the biggest physical challenge of my life. I have entered Unbound Gravel. I'm calling this episode Unbound Prostate Cancer. Unbound Gravel is a gravel race on dirt and gravel paths through Kansas, which most of us think is flat. This is in Flint Hills. So it's 10,000 feet of climbing. It will be in late May. I have about 6 months from the date of this video to train. About halfway point, I will do another very tough race. This is called the Mid-South 100. Only 100 miles, but about the same amount of climbing. So I'm going to have these 2 big tests, the Mid-South, a prep test to see whether I might make it to the 200-miler in late May. And I will document on this channel to see how my rising PSA, my thankfully slowly spreading cancer, whether I can be ready for this incredible race. So hang on for a few details. Stay tuned and stay tuned up.
And so I bring you Unbound Prostate Cancer. Let's begin by looking back about 5 years. In January 2020, I received my prostate cancer diagnosis based on an elevated PSA score. For a man of my age at the time, age 65, my score should have been 4. It was 17.6. It was a tentative diagnosis because physicians needed to confirm my diagnosis by biopsying my prostate. That would take a couple of months scheduling, or biopsies and simpler procedures were backed up a little bit. So we scheduled my biopsy for a couple months later, but before I could get a biopsy, COVID descended upon the planet. The first cases in my area were late February. I needed to wait for my biopsy. While I waited for my biopsy, with cancer in my nether regions, COVID got me. When your physician wife calls for an ambulance because you can barely breathe, you know you're in trouble. But I survived. And on July 1 of 2020, I received the very first prostate cancer surgery that the Yale Cancer Hospital performed post the arrival of the pandemic. Alas, I was still tired, still had recovering. I had been tormented once by COVID. I had undergone cancer surgery, as we would learn later. Still had some cancer in my system. So, back to the hospital. Shorter visit this time, but still. COVID and cancer are not a good combination. I survived again. But by a year later, I needed to undergo 8 weeks of daily radiation. My PSA was again rising. I was scheduled to really repeat my famous movie role. I did 8 weeks of daily radiation, Fridays off. The major side effect of radiation therapy is fatigue, which really peaks sometime after you receive the treatment. So about 10 weeks after the start of my treatment was probably the tiredest I was, because the radiation also affects healthy cells, but also when the cancer cells die off, they spew their noxious materials into your body. So I was tired, but I recovered in time to get a 3rd case of COVID. This time, though, the COVID was relatively mild. Still, The combination of 3 cases of COVID, including 2 severe enough to send me to the hospital, produced a very serious COVID-induced asthma that I got at the age of 65. Now, throughout all this period, I was vaccinated and boosted as much as I could, but alas, again, cancer and pandemics do not mix. I started training for the world's biggest mountain bike race from Banff, Canada to Mexico, a 2,700-mile race. Alas, just a few weeks before I was to go, I collided with a deer, true, while I was cycling, flipped over the handlebars, landed on my right shoulder, broke 18 bones, including 16 broken ribs, 2 of which punctured my lungs, nearly died, but a motorist happened to be nearby and saw it, called an ambulance, which got to me within 10 minutes. I recovered. Alas, I got sick again. I got osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis is a bone infection. It is fatal in 25% of the cases. This whole stressed immune system resulted in a infected wisdom tooth morphing into a life-threatening ailment, which included months of industrial strength antibiotics, including injecting myself daily intravenously for 6 weeks. Now, one of those treatments turned ototoxic, not a word I knew either, poisonous to the ears, and I developed permanent hearing loss in the course of a few days. But I got back up, I kept pedaling, and in June, I pedaled 1,000 miles from Banff, Canada to the Grand Tetons in Wyoming along the dirt paths up and down the Rocky Mountains. I cut the race, I wasn't racing, it was a ride short because my oncologist wanted me to return for more testing. And this would turn out, well, not then, but a year later, that would prove prescient. When I returned from the Tour Divide, my PSA score was low. It would be about another year before, we determined it's back, baby. This is a chart of my PSA score beginning in April of 2024 and ending in November of 2024, only a few weeks ago, as I sit here and narrate my life for you. I was at a 0.021 in April. That jumped to 0.057 in July, dropped a little bit to 0.05 in August, back up to 0.063 in September, 0.065 in October, 0.070 in November. Now, those are all small scores. Those are ultra-sensitive scores. Ultra-sensitive typically is any score below 0.1, in some places 0.2. The technology exists now for us to test way into the decimal points. Some physicians employ the ultra-sensitive scores, some do not. Okay, how do we determine whether your cancer is back? That is, has it recurred? Well, we call that biochemical recurrence, in acronym form BCR. And in the prostate cancer area, doctors consider that your cancer has recurred when your prostate-specific antigen score becomes detectable. That if it's way down in the thousands on the measure of the ultrasensitive PSA test, it hasn't recurred. The question is, when will doctors, but more importantly, when will your insurance company authorize further treatment for you? In the U.S., in most places, that is 0.2. That is 0.2 nanograms per milliliter. Most places outside of the U.S., it's at least as low as 0.1, and as we'll see shortly, most places argue that that is way, way, way too high. Now, in the U.S., we're compromised because we have these for-profit insurance companies that don't want to cover you until they think they need to. So they'll wait until your cancer is without question back in order to authorize treatment. That is, you cannot get treatment before your cancer is starting to thrive in your body. But that's a topic for another day. Let's get to the latest data from the late August 2024 Advanced Prostate Cancer Consensus Conference held in Switzerland. 100 oncologists, that is urological oncologists, met to discuss what the state of the art ought to be, what the standard of care ought to be, and in relation to this thrilling conversation, when we would define biochemical recurrence. The panel made 3 recommendations. The first, to define biochemical recurrence as either 2 consecutive rises in PSA with a total score over 0.1 nanograms per milliliter, or 3 consecutive rises of any PSA score, including ultrasensitive PSA. And more importantly, to initiate treatment anytime the PSA level is greater than or equal to 0.05 nanograms per milliliters in high-risk patients. Let's take a look. There's my score, right? I've had these 3 rises consecutively, and my prostate-specific antigen score has more than tripled in the last few months. The panel looked at this in the context of when to initiate the next step of treatment if you haven't yet had radiotherapy, and distinguished between 2 kinds of radiotherapy, salvage and adjuvant. Salvage radiation just means you get it like I got it. Doc does your surgery. Sometime later, the doc sees your PSA rising, jumps in, and nukes your nether regions. Adjuvant is radiation therapy given shortly as soon as you've recovered from your surgery. What's a high-risk patient? Well, you have to have at least 2 of those. I've only got 1, if we look at just this chart, to determine whether I'm high risk. But a Decipher score, it's a genomic test that measures the DNA of your cancerous bits that your pathologist keeps in his or her their freezer to just for this purpose of determining what kind of cancer you've got. I got a really high score, significantly higher than the 0.6. I got a 0.9, which means I have a really high risk. Also, I had a positive margin. Separate from these 4 factors, if you had a positive margin, that is, the doc left some cancer in you, you are a high-risk patient. So, according to the most recent literature, the most recent studies, I should be receiving new treatment, that is, yeah, it's back, baby. The cancer is swirling around in my body. So, what am I going to do about it? Take better care of myself, rest more? Nah. I'm going to ride the Unbound, a 300-kilometer, that is 200-mile premier gravel race. You have to be self-reliant. A lot of pros are asking, is it too hard? Yeah, it's hard. How hard could this race be? Well, let's consider one data point. This is a reference to Matthew Mohoric. He is a world tour quality rider. That is, he's ridden the Tour de France. He's won major stage races and stages across the planet. Last year, he won the World Gravel Cycling Championships. He came this year to Unbound with 2 domestiques, 2 riders who would ride in front of him, protecting him from wind he could draft. The plan was to ride as hard as they could and then let Matthew go forward when they got toward the end to claim glory in the U.S. to add to his glory in the World Championships. And about halfway through, he'd flatted, he'd covered with mud, totally exhausted, but with his sense of humor still in place. He said, I think we're going to stick to road racing. It's a beautiful day for cycling, beautiful weather, not so beautiful surface. It could be more smooth. It's pretty rocky. My sidewall that is tires does not like it, but hopefully my second tube of the day will hold now. And they rode a few more miles, abandoned, got in a van, and went to a hotel, got something nice to eat, and nice warm showers. So yes, I won the lottery, or maybe lost the lottery. There are a lot of applications from around the globe. Several thousand people will ride the race. Several times that will apply to ride the race. There's a lottery to allow organizers to pick folks who can ride the race. Now, the lottery is by age group, and I am in the 70-plus age group. I suspect that there were not as many 70-plus applicants as there were slots. But in any event, I'm a lucky guy headed to Kansas to ride the world's hardest bicycle ride.
So there you have it, my big plan, testing my body and my spirit and my fortitude in the next 6 months. Let's go Unbound Cancer to Unbound Gravel. Hope you stay tuned.